Welcome. I'm delighted to welcome you to our presentation today titled The Art of Photographing Dance. I'm Libby Schmiegel, dance curator in the music division at the Library of Congress, and it's my honor to introduce you to our guest today, Dr. David A. Fullard, who will share some of the stunningly beautiful images of dancers, which will illustrate the technique and personal approach he has developed for capturing bodies in motion. This presentation also offers you a sneak peek into his vast archive of dance photography, as his archival collection will soon be on its way to us at the Library of Congress. I hope this presentation will pique your interest so you'll want to see more. I met Dave about 5 years ago and I was immediately captivated by his work. I learned more about his commitment to finding his own method of choreographing the photo as much as dance itself is choreographed. How can a two-dimensional still image capture dance in a way that communicates the same emotional response as seeing the dance live? That's what Dave's work is all about. Let me tell you a little more about Dave before I turn the session over to him. Dr. David Fullard is an internationally known freelance photographer specializing in dance photography, portraiture, and photojournalism. His work has appeared in New York Times, Attitude, The Village Voice, Dance Magazine, Black Mask, and many more, and his images have been featured in books as well as exhibits celebrating dancers and choreographers. He received his bachelor's degree in the fine arts and photography from the School of Visual Arts, and he holds 2 master's degrees, and his doctorate is in a very different subject, forensic behavioral science. Currently, Dr. Fullard is visiting associate professor at the State University of New York, Empire State College. So our speaker today is one of the most multi-talented and broadly educated individuals I know. Let's turn now to Dr. Fullard to tell us how, with this fascinating background, he came to find a passion for capturing dance. Dave, over to you.
Libby, thank you so very, very much for that very kind introduction. I deeply appreciate it. I'm actually glad you mentioned, my work in forensics. For 30 years, I worked at Rikers Island. Oddly enough, a lot of the dancers, with the exception of Elio Pomare, don't know about it. And many of these incredible artists actually saved my life. To be honest, working at Rikers in the daytime and then going to the studio and working with dancers in the evening was really helpful for my own mental health. So thank you for mentioning that. I want to talk a little bit about the beginnings. Can we talk or go to the next slide, please? So in the beginning, go to the next one. All of this work started with sports photography. I was really fascinated by the ability to capture movement. That's what actually got me started in all of this. And as I began to photograph more and more sports, here you see 2 wrestlers, but in high school, I was photographing football and basketball and track. But as time moved on, I needed more nuance. I needed to get more out of it. Next slide, please. Moving forward, the very, very first dance was with Rudolf Nureyev. That was the first bit of dance that I saw. This was a period in my life when my parents were taking me out to the theater to see different films. Much of the theater I saw had dance in it. Such as The King and I, Ain't Misbehaving, Pearly, which I was really fascinated by, Raisin, Pippin, Chicago, wonderful choreography, a chorus line, also very, very wonderful choreography. But seeing Nureyev really made a huge difference in my life. Next slide, please. Uh, this man was an athlete. He was an athlete, but he brought something more to the stage. He brought unbelievable emotion. He brought an intensity that I didn't see in sports, but I saw it in dance. And this is what attracted me to really start to think about photographing dance long term. Next slide, please. And again, seeing him paired up with different dancers and the interaction did remind me of sports a great deal, but it also enabled me to see other things. And again, emotion and expression were very, very important to me. I was somewhat held back by photographing in the theater, but of course, this was my first time really thinking about dance, and I began to think about what I would do if I had these dancers in the studio. My fantasy was going up to the lighting booth and changing the lighting so that I could light it in a particular way to sculpt the dancer's body. Next
So
slide.
these two
Yes.
photos, Dave, and the next one
Mhm.
are taken by you within the theater,
That's
right?
correct.
Yes.
That's
So
correct.
you were
This is during
sitting
an actual
close enough
performance.
to handle a camera and get these clean shots.
Yeah, actually, I was in the orchestra mid-range with a 400 millimeter lens. I was quite uncomfortable. I couldn't move around, but I was able to get a few shots that I was really happy with. But it also made me think about what I could do if I had these two dancers in a studio.
S- So one would think perhaps that most photographers would want to be taking photos in the theater, but you clearly were feeling constrained by that.
Absolutely. My goal was to get them out of the theater and to recreate this movement in the studio where I could craft the lighting and I had control over where I stood and how I was able to capture what I needed to capture to express myself and also to capture the dance and the choreography the way it was meant to be seen. So we recreated the dance in the studio.
So, and how did you get started doing that? I guess you really don't come from the dance field. So, were you well connected to dancers? How did you find the subjects to work with you?
Actually, I wasn't well connected with dance at all, but I was a big reader of the Village Voice at the time, and I saw an ad for a dancer by the name of Steve Malakus, and I reached out to him. He was a very young dancer. I reached out to him, and we were able to get together in the studio. He was my very, very first dancer that I actually brought into the studio and was able to work with. And you now see Steve on screen. Uh, I explained to Steve that, I had photographed dance in the theater, but this was my very first time bringing a dancer into the studio with my own lighting. And he was quite happy to do this. And what we agreed to do was some improvisation where I was allowed to stop and start. And usually, when I stopped, I was trying to tweak the lighting to express certain things, to do certain things that I wanted the lighting to do. I wanted to sculpt with lighting. That's what photography is about. If you have no light, you have no photograph. And with Steve, I was able to do that, and we were able to work together for several months actually, with me actually perfecting, my style of lighting. You can go to the
So,
next slide. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, there are a couple more for Steve
Yeah.
here. And seeing as this was improvisation, how did that affect what you were developing?
Because we were improvising, we actually worked together with this. He agreed to, allow me to give him some ideas about movement. And it was important for me to see him actually move because my goal was to photograph the dancer in motion. So he would move for me. And again, we would stop and start, and I would be able to tweak the lighting and also tweak my position within the studio in order to get the photograph that I wanted to get, in order to also to stay true to the movement that he was creating right there on our stage, and it worked out well. It enabled me to practice with a dancer that was really working and moving.
So, next slide.
And this is some of the different movement that we were doing. And again, when I light, I usually work with 5 lights, and one of them is directly above the dancer, and that's what we were doing here. We were playing with sculpting the light to create a bit of a shadow on the floor, but also to sculpt. You notice his hand is quite sculpted, and you can see how the light is hitting the hand on a black background. That's what I was looking to do, and that's been a signature of mine with almost all of the dancers that I've worked with. And again, usually in black and white, rarely in color, but at times I did do some work in color.
So from there, Dave, I know that you began to really branch out and you began to work with just an enormous range of styles and genres and different choreographers that are both well known in modern dance as well as in ballet. And
Yeah,
you were even working with some who were from traditional art forms like Balinese dance.
right.
And
Yes. The range was huge, and for me, that was necessary. I needed to see a wide variety of dance. Working with Elio Pomare, working with Hawkins, uh, oddly enough, they were both in the same building, so that was kind of interesting. And again, working with these dancers in their studios, watching their rehearsals became a part of the pattern that I developed in order to learn what the choreographer was saying. So I not only,
and yeah, and I would imagine that that interaction with all those different styles might also be giving you a sense of different kinds of emotions and
yes,
different costuming, all of which might need to be lit differently.
absolutely, absolutely. It was very prescriptive. You know, it depended on what the choreographer and the dance artists were doing and what they were trying to say. So again, lighting always changed. It was constantly developing. It was very dynamic and quite different for different genres of dance.
So next slide. This photograph, I feel, is really impressive because of the way you've lit the twirling skirt. I imagine that that's why you've chosen that as one of your examples.
Yes. Jane was with the 5 by 2 Plus Modern Dance Company. And when I saw this dance, it really reminded me of the work of Barbara Morgan. Barbara, although I never met her in person, I know her work well and studied her work over the decades. And she worked with a 4 by 5 camera, which is a very large camera. She did her own lighting, her own processing. So I was able to learn a lot from just looking at her photographs. And at the time, I was in the School of Visual Arts. So when there was something that I was looking at and didn't quite understand, I could always go to one of my professors at Visual Arts and say, you know, I'm looking at this picture, but I'm not quite understanding how she did this or how she did that. And my professors were quite amazing. They never gave you the answer. They told you, look at it some more, talk it out. Uh, what do you think she was doing given the equipment that she was working with at the time? And they would force you to really look at the photograph to figure out what the photographer was doing. And that's where a lot of my learning took place.
Next slide. This slide is just so impressive and dramatic. It, and maybe you would say a little bit about
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
attempt of you to find the emotion in dance and then capture it in a still image. This one, I think, demonstrates that beautifully.
Elio Pomare is our, I mean, we all looked at him as the father figure, as our choreographic father. Uh, Elio knew a good bit about me. And when I met Elio, this was in 1974, 75, at his studio on 14th Street. We developed a really good friendship, and he too was interested in the photographic process. And I talked to him about what I wanted to do with some of his dancers and also with him in the studio. And I made it clear that, you know, our sessions, our studio sessions usually lasted for about 4 or 5 hours because I wanted to light him in a particular way. I really wanted to sculpt with light. I explained to him that that sometimes was time consuming, and he agreed, and the dancers all agreed to do this work with me. What was really interesting about Elio would give his dancers things to read about his, not so much about his choreography, but about what he was choreographing about. Uh, that was important. Just hearing that was important. And when I found that out about Elio, we started to talk about society. That's what Elio choreographed about. A he was a choreographer who commented on society, and working at Rikers, he and I had some really interesting conversations. And this picture, of course, is Blues for the Jungle, which is basically his signature piece. And again, you notice the emotion. I hope all viewers see it. And again, sculpting very, very carefully with light to separate that hand. When you look at his hand and you see how it's lit and the lighting is actually outlining his hand and his body, and we're creating light and shadow, especially for black and white photography. I love the lush grays, the deep blacks, the sharp whites. That adds to the emotion in the photograph. Um, yeah. Next slide,
Yeah.
please. Yeah.
Next slide. I'm really curious about some of these photographic techniques that you have, because all of these photos are distinguished by having that very black background, and then the way in which you use the light to make that figure pop out in the way that you want it to be seen. And you know, it it's of course not what you could not do in the theater,
Hmm.
which is a really interesting situation, because you wouldn't have control of making that background so black so that the contrast works for you. You can see here's this one. I love this junkie solo, this leap.
Yes.
It You can feel the movement,
Mhm.
but maybe you'd like to take it from
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. That's my good friend, my buddy, John Jewell, who is now Dr. John Jewell. He's a medical doctor at this point in his life. And when we worked on this particular piece, I remember it so distinctly. We started at about 9 o'clock and finished about 2 in the morning. And again, tweaking the light and tweaking his body in motion, moving through the air. Uh, I wanted to capture not just the beautiful tone in his upper body, but when we were practicing this, and I would, allow him to get used to the space, so he's moving through the space without me photographing, but with me watching. And as I'm watching, I get ideas about how I want to light this. But what struck me was the costume and how the costume moved in space along with him. And I said, I need to make certain that the lighting is such that I capture all of the ripples, the movement, the tonality in the costume, in that skirt that he's wearing, and that skirt moves so beautifully. Uh, it was a bit of a challenge. I knew what I wanted, uh, and again, I'm not shooting with a digital camera. I'm shooting with film, so I can't go back and check and see that I get it. Uh, but we worked it out so that he could keep moving, and I could keep experimenting with the light. And of course, this was the outcome. Uh, this did not happen by chance. This was the two of us working together in concert to make certain that he was in the right place with the right light, with the right movement. Uh, Again, quite challenging, but you see the outcome. It was absolutely worth it. And the dancers were real troopers to really keep up with the pace of what I was doing. Yeah, very important.
Next
Great
slide.
dancer too. Yeah. This, of course, is Lenny Williams. And sometimes it's important to get a super sharp uh, photograph. Other times I want to see some movement. I want to do some special effects. And this, of course, is Lenny Williams performing Phoenix. which choreographically is Elio's one of Elio's signature pieces. Um, Again, I wanted to show movement, but I also wanted to do something special with this particular piece. Of course, Phoenix is coming back from ashes and coming back to life, and that was the purpose of this particular photograph. You can move to the next slide.
This is Lenny again.
This is Lenny
Very
again.
different look.
Yeah. This is Lenny fully alive and joyous. Again, when we talk about dance photography, you know, sometimes you're looking for different types of feeling, a different type of emotion. This particular piece was a very joyous piece. And again, the costume really worked well with Lenny's ability to move. And Lenny was one of those dancers that had a fully articulated body. He could do just about anything movement wise, but he also captured emotion, and that was important to me. And again, the lighting and the space were important because that's how you were able to create this particular photograph. The costume, again, the skirt moved beautifully, but it was challenging because he did have to move a certain way in order for me to get that costume to do what I wanted it to do. So again, we did move through this several times, and he actually, I remember this so distinctly, he actually stopped the session for a moment because he wasn't feeling comfortable or in the right place in this particular space, and it was necessary for him to find that level of comfort. So we stopped, and it was good that we stopped because I was able to watch him move, and I knew exactly the moment that I wanted to capture. I knew exactly where that decisive moment was. A great photographer, Henry Cartier-Bresson, talked about that decisive moment, and I was able to see it as Lenny was working out this particular section of the dance. And once we got to the place where he was comfortable and I was comfortable, we were able to create this photograph.
Next slide.
This is another wonderful piece of Elio's called Mi Saluba. Uh, the challenge here was to get Lenny up in the air, but also to have him to continue to move. Again, I was looking for a certain type of movement in Lenny's arms. And again, the lighting, the sculpting with the light was very, very important. Uh, just a wonderful experience. And when I look at this photograph, I haven't seen this dance in quite some time, but when I look at this photograph, it really is reminiscent of what you see on stage. Uh, Again, getting the lighting just right, getting Lenny to get the arms in the position that I needed it to. Again, we moved through this a number of times. We rehearsed it. Uh, these works in the studio were much the same as having the dancer on stage in a theater. There was a deep rehearsal that would go into it to capture a particular moment. Unlike in a theater where the dancer is going to perform the entire dance, these fellas came in and we knew what section we were looking for, and they would have to work up to this particular point in order for me to capture it. So they're not getting into this particular position. They're actually dancing it and moving through it as if they were on stage in a theater.
Next slide. No, it's apparent in how you're describing the photographic process that you really had to work with the subjects of the dances, the dancers, and I imagine the choreographers as well, because they could give you some feedback on
Right.
what they saw as what was important and when it worked. And did you go to unlit studio rehearsals where you had a chance to just see the choreographer work with dancers? Did that help to establish trust? What else? What was your process for that, for the preparation?
You actually hit the nail on the head. Before any work that I did in the photographic studio, I would always go to a dress rehearsal. And the dress rehearsal was important because not only for me to actually see the choreographer and the dancers working together, but it was important for the dancers to see me and to get to know me. And that made it possible for them to come into the studio. They already know who I am, they have an idea of what I'm going to do. And it put them in a place where they were totally relaxed. They knew what was going to happen. They knew me, and trust is an important part. They trusted me to be true to the choreography and to work with them in a particular way where we were able to together to create, a piece of art. And it was also important to hear the choreographer talk to the dancers because before any choreographer gets the dancer uh, up on the floor in the studio, they're talking about their intent. And it was important for me to hear that intent and what they're trying to say with their choreography. So, yes, absolutely key. As a matter of fact, I would not be able to photograph a dancer without first having spent some time with that dancer in the studio. As much for the dancer to see me and me to see the dancer, it enabled both of us to feel comfortable with each other. So there's a real communication there, and I think that's extremely important. My photographs wouldn't look the way they look without having that interaction.
Next slide.
And
Now,
that was
this is a very, very different kind of dance style. We're here looking at restagings of early 20th century dance
hmm.
with Lori Bellalove.
Laurie, again, was one of my early photographic endeavors. I had seen her perform at one of the small theaters in New York. And I remember going backstage and introducing myself to her, and we had a great conversation. And she invited me to her studio to see her dances and to just hang out. Again, extremely important. I had never seen this particular kind of dance in the past. So this was very new to me, but I I immediately saw all of the possibilities. And she too saw some of my work and said, hey, we can get together and collaborate. And we've been doing just that for over 25 years at this point. So, yes,
Next slide.
absolutely spectacular performer. And this, of course, is Di Harvey. And I call her Di because we've gotten to know each other over the years. And everything that I've talked about kind of comes into play here. Because I had worked with Pomari for so long, she and I knew each other and still know each other. We actually spoke today over the phone about this particular session that we're having now. And again, I wanted to photograph her and really sculpt this particular piece because Hex has an interesting costume with lots and lots of tactile pieces to it. Her hair is black on a black background. That was important to me. Having the black background adds a lot of drama to it. So it had to be lit in a particular way. I was looking for a very, very particular moment within this dance. So again, Di would go into it many, many times during the course of us photographing this particular section. And a funny thing happened. I would often ask her, okay, Di, can you do it one more time? And she would do it again. I would tweak the lighting. And Di, just one more time. And of course, she did it. And after I had done the one more time bit one too many times, Di is very direct. And she looked at me and put her hands on her hip and says, this body doesn't run on Duracell batteries. But we kept doing it until we got what we wanted. And again, my kudos to all of the dancers for, working with photographers, especially working with me, where I'm looking for a particular moment, and sometimes that moment is elusive, but we manage to find it.
Next slide.
This
This
is an
is Lenny
important,
again.
yeah,
And
this,
again, this is one of those perhaps where you wanted to have a softer focus for part of this, his image, it looks to me.
yes, this is a moment from NightSpell. Uh, I have a relationship to this particular piece of choreography. It's from Blues for the Jungle. It's the NightSpell section. In this particular picture, this person uh, that Lenny is recreating uh, is in prison. They're in a cell, and he is now reminiscing what he's now missing in his life. When we were shooting this, I can't tell you what Lenny did, but I had to stop. It awakened something in me, and Lenny asked, well, "What's wrong?" And I said, the quality of your movement, is just kind of awakening something in me. And we talked about it, we processed it. And what it was, having worked at Rikers Island and having worked the Midnight Tour, when you're walking around doing your tour, checking on people to make certain that they're still alive, you see people in their cell. And oftentimes, these burly guys that we think of as being so dangerous, at night, for some reason, they're very vulnerable. And you'll see people pacing in their cell. Uh, you'll see emotion. You'll see them crying. And Lenny and I talked about that. And then we went back to shoot it. And Lenny was able to capture and almost connect with me what I was feeling, and he was able to bring it to the photographic stage. I think that's what adds to the power of this particular image. And again, it's almost dreamlike because that's what I would see in people's cells. A lot of these guys were in a particular emotional place, and Lenny was able to capture that.
It's amazing. Amazing.
Next slide.
Next slide.
And
Well,
this
we've
is
been
my favorite topic.
there isn't any dance, there isn't any theater if you don't have light.
If you don't have light, you have to have light. Um, One of the things that bothers me, and I'm really critical of other people's work, but to shine a light on a dancer where it's flat and you don't see shape, you don't see gradations of gray from deep, solid black to clean, crisp white, does a disservice to the choreography, does a disservice to the dancer. Uh, Again, taking the dancer out of the theater and bringing them into a photographic studio, you have to first see the dance. You have to talk to the dancer about what your process is so they understand what you're doing. And you're able to create magic. Risa Steinberg and I, again, got to know each other in the rehearsal room with Anna. Uh, that in and of itself was magic, being in a room with Anna Sokolo and watching her teach not just movement, but where the movement came from in her mind and in her perspective and in her experiences in life, and have it born, in the studio, in the rehearsal studio, and then taking that and bringing it into the dance studio with everything that she said swirling around in my mind. you know you're able to recreate, capture, and even embellish what goes on the stage in a theater. And again, we worked on this particular piece. I knew exactly what I was looking for, and so did she. And as we were shooting through this, she was saying that wasn't it, and I said I know, and then she would do something and say, well, you did it this time, but I didn't capture it, and but we would work it out so that we were both on time, so to speak. And this is a photograph that is very much on time. Next slide. Dear sweet Peter Sparling, from the Graham Company, but uh, he actually formed his own company. Again, meeting him and seeing so much of his work. Peter was a guy, is a guy. Peter's still around. We spoke a couple of months ago. Always choreographing, always creating, and I got the idea to just ask him. I don't want to photograph a particular piece. I want to go into the studio with you and let's just play. Uh, I want to see what you're working on, what ideas you have. I want to share some of my ideas with you, and we would begin to just connect. He would show me a piece of movement. I would ask him, "Can you just change the focus of the movement?" He would change it. I would go ahead and work with the lighting to create a particular type of sculpture. If you look at his face, I like the way the light is hitting the edge of his face, his forehead, his nose, his jaw, but the eyes are quite dark. It adds to the emotion and the nuance of this particular photograph. And again, Peter, like many of the dancers, was willing to experiment. And when I go into a studio with a dancer to just do improvisationalized movement, that's what we're doing. We're experimenting over a fairly long period of time to see what we can do together as a team. And again, with Peter, that was a great deal of fun because he was able to really say certain things with his body, and I was able to complement what he was saying with lighting. You can go
Next
to the
slide.
next slide.
Next slide.
Again, NightSpell with Lenny Williams. We talked about this, and we talked about a period of time when an inmate is in a cell. And again, NightSpell is about a person in a cell who's thinking and reminiscing. That can be a dangerous time. And I said, sometimes what I had to do was look at what a person was doing or saying and try to figure out if they were going to harm themselves. And Lenny said, yeah, it's almost like they're saying goodbye. That's where this came from. Uh, this is Lenny's interpretation of someone in a cell who is saying goodbye. Uh, Not so much that they were going on to, another prison, but going on to the afterlife. And we spoke about that. And again, this is what Lenny came up with based on the choreography of Elio Pomare. It was a powerful moment. And I think between the two of us, between Lenny and I, we were able to capture it.
It's very moving. Next slide.
And again, wanting dancers to move, this particular section of Morning Without Sunrise, uh, I worried a lot because the main character, Vincent Taylor, is a brilliant dancer. He's a very tall man. He's about 6'2", powerful man. It was the job of the dancers in the background to kind of keep him safe. This is the actual choreography, Elio's choreography. Uh, and I was constantly telling Vincent, I don't want you to hurt yourself. Be careful. And he made it very clear to me. He says, don't worry about me. You do your thing. Let me do mine. He said, but I want to do this so full out that unlike the theater, I wouldn't necessarily recover from it. I would actually move quite close to the floor and maybe fall out of it. And that's what we did. And we repeated this a number of times. Again, I needed to tweak the lighting because I did want the dancers that are actually supporting him to be very, very much clear so that people could see this man's choreography. And Stanley Joseph, who is to the right of us, is a very dark skinned man. But again, I continue to use this black background, and through lighting, I'm able to separate him in such a way that I can still capture what he's doing and all the strength that goes into it. And we were able to again create a moment that would have been really difficult to capture in a theater. That's the other wonderful thing about going into a studio and working this and reimagining it in the studio, but still maintaining the choreography that you would see on stage. Again, uh, wonderful, wonderful moment in time.
Next slide.
Jose Coronado was a soloist. He did have a company, Jose Coronado and Dancers. This is a piece called Rose Wound. And again, when you talk about working with a dancer in the studio, there's always that moment, and that not so much a moment, but a period when you spend time just talking to someone about their work. And Jose and I talked about this at his home prior to photographing it, and then I actually went to see him rehearsing it in the studio. And Jose was a very spiritual man. When you talk about Rose Wound, he's talking about the wounds that a rose or the stem of a rose can make on the body. If you think about the crucifixion where Christ is crowned with thorns, that's what he was talking about in this particular piece. It's interesting because the studio that I work in is very, very quiet. And Jose was a man that would come into the studio and walk around, and he was shaking his head. I said, "Well, what's going on, in your mind? What are you thinking?" He says, "I can work here." I said, "Well, okay, that's good." He says, "I can work here because it's very quiet." And he said, "Well, I also need you to be somewhat quiet." And I was, and he was able to move through this and being much more gentle than I normally am with dancers. We talked about tweaking the lighting and tweaking some of the shapes that he was creating, tweaking the movement to match where I was lighting, and it worked out really well. He was an interesting man to work with, very interesting, and we came up with a wonderful series of photographs of this particular piece, which hasn't been done since the last time this photograph was taken. So it's an important document and an important time.
So David, you do talk about a lot about tweaking the lighting. Do you start with some basic lights and then do your tweaking depending on the dance
Yeah,
that you're seeing?
I start with something basic, but it
Next slide.
it's our starting point. Yep, it's our starting point. And then after I get to see the dancer move through the movement that we're looking for, that's when it's necessary for me to stop and again start moving lights around. This is the basic setup. But again, depending on the section that we're doing and how it's working in the particular space that we're working in, I will need to, again, when I say tweak the lighting, basically I'm changing intensity. The lighting can be controlled in that manner. Turning certain lights on, turning certain lights off, having certain combinations of lighting for a particular section of a dance that I'm photographing. So that's what makes these sessions rather long, because each particular facet of the dance that you're photographing might need a different kind of lighting. The one size fits all, that doesn't apply here. I can't operate like that. It has to be specific for that specific piece of the dance. And again, that's what makes it hard photographing at a theater. I can't do that. I think the lighting designer would be quite upset with me if I tried to do that. So in the studio, I have control over everything. And for me, that's important.
Next slide.
And here you have an example of what I just talked about. Uh, Again, two people in the space required uh, a good bit of lighting to do what I wanted to do. And again, this is Peter Sparling and Jane Gallagher. And Peter, of course, is wearing black. Peter and I kind of thought the same about color, and he enjoyed doing this black on black thing that I like. Again, because it adds to the drama. Uh, so he had to be lit individually, and she had to be lit individually. So we worked on this for quite some time, but we were able to come up with something quite appealing to all of us. We all enjoyed this particular photograph. Next slide. Same here with the lighting. That scarf, I wanted light coming through the scarf to make it luxurious and beautiful, creamy white with subtle gray tones. Again, that was not by chance. That was, again, tweaking the lighting in such a way that we did have some light coming through that scarf. And then I also, when you look at Laurie's leg, I wanted to sculpt that leg so that it really stood out, and you can see, again, gradation of tone from a fairly light gray to deep shadow, and then going back to this warm gray tone. It adds to what she's saying choreographically. The light is complementing her choreographic voice, so to speak.
I think it's really interesting how you use the light to actually illuminate what is white, and finding the shades within that.
Yeah.
Next slide. And next slide. The photograph here with Pepsi Bethel with his white costume is in such a stunning contrast to the soft, fluid costume or the scarf of Laurie Belilove in the last slide.
Yes.
You want it?
Yes. This is Pepsi in the Minstrel. And again, the costume here is a traditional outfit for this particular type of dance. It's a cakewalk. And again, the costume in the background gives it a nice, sharp contrast. And I did want him to stand out in this way. I believe Pepsi at this time was in his 70s, I believe. And I was a little concerned about going through much of the movement because there were a number of different pieces of this dance that I wanted to photograph. But Pepsi surprised me. Pepsi was quite energetic and able to do so very much. I think I was the tired one at the end of the session because he bounced out of the studio just fine. And again, this is a piece that we worked on in the rehearsal studio first. He was not only showing me the movement, but telling me a little bit about the history so that when I got into the studio, I had a better grasp of what I was doing and what I needed to do with him. So again, this is another area where the whole package comes together. It's the lighting, it's the costume being a certain way, the background, and most importantly, the conversation that we had in the rehearsal studio, and getting to know this particular dance, getting to know Pepsi as a person, and allowing Pepsi to get to know me as a person. That's how an image like this is created. Next slide. And again, Anna Sokolo's work, as I remember, with Evelyn Shepard. Evelyn and I had known each other for a while, so she was able to come into the studio well prepared. I knew this piece, again, from seeing Anna actually place this piece of choreography on Evelyn's body. That sounds strange to hear, but that's what a choreographer is doing. They are actually implanting movement and knowledge into a dancer so that when they get into the theater or into the studio, they can recall all of this material and bring it forward. Again, we worked on lighting together. She actually had some ideas about lighting that we tried. And again, this is a collaboration, so that's allowed. And actually, I look for it. That actually works for me. Next slide. Again, improvisation with Peter Sparling. Conversation is important. Peter was talking to me throughout our time here. And just kind of in a really serendipitous way, Peter said, "My God, I wish I could dance with myself." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" "I wish there was a clone of me." And I said, "Wow, that's a deep thought." I said, "Can we stop for a minute? Because now this is planted in my mind and I can't get it out. And I'm trying to figure out how do I do a double exposure with this particular piece of equipment that I was working with. I had never done a double exposure. So I started to experiment very quickly and figured out how to do it. And again, it took a lot of time. We had to figure out lighting for the double exposure because I wanted his face sculpted in a particular way. And we actually did it. We did a series of these double exposures with Peter actually dancing with Peter. It worked out really well. It worked out really well. Next slide. The rehearsal, as I've talked about, being in the room with the choreographer and the dancers makes all the difference, especially when we come into the photographic studio to actually photograph the work. Part of my being there, and not just being there, but being present in the moment, actually interacting with the choreographer and the dancers when they are on break, never when they're actually working, but when they're on break, makes it possible for a dancer to come into the studio and actually almost get to work right away. They don't have to get to know me. They already know what to expect. That's important. And again, hearing the choreographer, in this case, Ilio Pomare, talk to the dancers about what it is he is saying choreographically, uh, uh, you know, moving through his own choreographic voice through the dancers, again, makes it possible for me to not just see the movement, but to know where the movement is coming from. And then taking all of that and knowing exactly how I want to interpret that in the studio, again, makes all the difference. Next slide. Again, here working with Ruben, shaping the body, and again, placing the choreography in the dancer's body, again, is extremely important for me to see and to experience, and then to talk to the dancer afterwards about what it was like to have that movement placed on them and placed in their body. Next slide.
I can imagine what kind of directions are being given here. This is really exciting.
Yeah, photographically, I learned a lot from Ilio about bringing out what's in a dancer's body. He is being quite animated here. I actually learned how to be animated in the studio when I had a dancer, and the dancer wasn't quite getting into the emotion of the particular piece of choreography. What I did learn from Elio was, hey, you got to be yourself, and you've got to do what it takes to get what you need on film. And that's exactly what Elio is doing here. He is trying to draw something out of Jamal Barnes, but he's doing it through his own body, and it works. And that's what's happening here. And it was a wonderful moment to capture in the rehearsal studio. Next slide. Some of what happens in the rehearsal studio is actually, it's almost spiritual. It's in a way, it's like being in church to watch a choreographer and a dance artist, move through choreography. They're actually working on Phoenix, and Phoenix, in and of itself, is quite a spiritual piece. Is the rebirth, coming back to life. And Elio is talking him through this. He's not moving it this time, but he's actually talking him through it so that Jamal is able to feel what Elio is talking about. And again, when we went into the studio to photograph this, all of that came back uh, to Jamal, to me. Elio was there to shape some of this and to actually help us with the movement. So again, it was just a very important moment in the rehearsal studio that we were able to bring into the photographic studio. Next
What I
slide.
find
Yep.
what I find really wonderful about your photographs of Elio in rehearsal is that it seems so poignant. Dancers and the choreographers often feel that body-to-body transmission of dance, learning from the master, is so important. And
Yeah.
not only are you capturing the result of the final dance, but you've also captured process.
Mhm.
And it's really palpable there.
Mhm.
You can just feel the connection between the dancer and the choreographer in those
Yes.
photos. They're just um, very, um, very, it communicates that, you're giving us a glimpse into that very tight relationship of
Yes.
transmitting the dance. Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
So we've moved also into the psychology of the uh, um, of the studio photo session, and I think some of your anecdotes have really already given us a window into the two parts of your life, which
Mm.
are the photographic expertise, the artistic, and yet at the same time, your work with psychology, your work with behavioral sciences, your
Mm.
ability to see people and to read their body language
Mhm.
comes through, and the way in which you've created
Yeah.
trust and friendship um, when they're giving themselves, when they're sharing their arts. And I think you've probably got a few more examples of this for us to see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting utilizing some of my knowledge of psychology, in particular, having a safe space, a safe holding environment. Winnicott, who was a actually worked with children, talked about this safe place and this holding environment. And that's actually how I see the studio. The studio has to be a safe place. The dancers coming in, they know the critical eye of the camera. Unlike being in a theater where you have an audience and they're actually performing the piece from start to finish, in a photographic studio, that camera, that eye can be critical. And again, you have to make the dancer feel at home, safe, and in a safe place, a holding place, a holding environment. Uh, Winnicott made it clear that as long as the person feels safe and that they're in an environment where they feel that they're held, magic happens, and they're able to do certain things that uh, basically defy the imagination. They're able to take things to the next level. That's what you see here with Gus Solomon. This was another fantastic piece, flesh, wine, and sinew to the bone. Uh, we worked on this prior to coming into the studio, where again I was able to talk to Gus over time and then bring it into the studio. Uh, that's the key to the psychology of bringing someone into a studio. They really do need to know you and feel comfortable with you prior to the actual session. You can move to the next slide. Carlos Orta, there is a time. Again, I think Carlos was the one treating me at this point because, again, we talked about Jose Limon and his intentions for this particular piece of choreography. And it was important for Carlos to talk to me. He wanted to make certain that I understood where Jose Limon was coming from. And again, out of that conversation came, again, this wonderful piece. And like with all of my photography, the lighting was very important, and we tweaked it to the point where we were able to capture this moment. Next slide. Wonderful jump. Again, tweaking the lighting so that Carlos's face and hair, for me, was important. That was part of the magic of this particular piece, and creating that spotlight that you see on the floor.
I noticed the spotlight, and I
Yes.
realized he's really doing this amazing jump, and there's no shadow.
Yeah, that's right.
Whereas sometimes you see the shadows that
Yeah.
you've created, and that creates a different message or power. Really interesting. Thank you.
That's correct.
Next slide.
Claire Iwatsu, Lost in the Humming Air. So relevant for the times that we're living in right now. Claire, we talked about this. Claire was fascinated by how when we feel the need to scream based on what's going on, the real things that are going on in the world and in our own lives, but we're somehow need to mask that, but we also need to express it. That's what she's talking about here, having this veil in front of her that is kind of masking what she's feeling and thinking and doing at this point, but still allowing someone to at least know her anguish. And that's what we're experiencing here. And again, the challenge for me was to get that veil just as translucent as I could so that, again, the concept came through. And again, that's done purely with lighting.
Next slide.
Next slide.
This is truly the most beautiful jump that I've seen. Yeah. Sailing over the stage.
Yeah. John Parks is amazing. And again, here I think about that decisive moment, the apex of a moment. And that's what we were going after. And, you think of Henry Cartier-Bresson talking about the decisive moment. And the other thing that came to mind was Nijinsky and seeing John with this jump. And someone once asked, Nijinsky, how do they capture those photographs of you jumping? And he said, I simply jump and then pause. And then the photographer is allowed to take the picture. Of course, we know that physics kind of prevents that from happening. Yet, John talked me through this. He says, you'll see when I'm there, and I'll be there for about 2 seconds. I said, well, John, aren't you going to continue to move? He says, I'll be still for 2 seconds, and you figure out how to capture this. And we did.
There is that moment of suspension.
There is that moment of suspension. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Next slide. Chimera with Murray Lewis. I don't often shoot in color. This piece I felt worked well in color, along with doing some sculpting with the lighting. And it worked. This was a fun piece to photograph. Again, seeing Murray in the studio work this piece out. And this is a very fluid piece, so Murray is constantly changing the shape of this bag. It's actually a bag that he's wearing, and he's moving through a number of different shapes in a very dynamic way, never stopping. We did this several times. Again, this was an enjoyable piece to photograph. Yes. Murray is a very special dancer.
And he was also, along with Alwyn Nikolai, just so sensitive about what
Yeah.
the the costume design, the
Yes.
abstraction of costume design. And I agree with you that this in color, it needed to
Mm.
be in color to
Right.
make that statement.
Yes. Yes. And sometimes figuring out what's going to work either in black and white or color is a bit of a challenge, but it was
Mhm.
clear for this particular piece that, yeah, this would definitely work well in color. And again, with the collaboration of Murray and how we did this, again, we came up with, an important photograph.
Next slide.
Yes, here's Jose Coronado in Rose Wound, and this is actually the crucifixion. That is what he was talking about. Uh, I actually wanted to somehow emphasize uh, the concept of crucifixion photographically, and came up with the shadow that we're going to repeat this. It's something that needs to be said again, and we're saying it again on the dance floor with the shadow, a very, very strong,
Mhm.
deep, clearly present shadow. Uh, in psychology, when we talk about trauma, we often talk about it in the form of a shadow, that something happened to you, and although your body is still there, there's this shadow of what happened that's present. It doesn't necessarily go away unless you go into treatment for a while, and the treatment works, and then you at least have control over the shadow, that shadow aspect of ourselves, and that's what's happening here. Again, I wanted to emphasize, what he's saying choreographically with light. Next
Next
slide.
slide.
And the warm up, you can go to the next slide. Thea was a wonderful dancer. This is from Martha Graham's Frontier. Warming up is key. I'm asking dancers to come into the photographic studio and do what they do in a theater. So when they come into the dance studio, the photographic studio, they have to actually get into performance mode. And in order to do that, the warm up is important, because without that, they would injure themselves, because I'm asking them to actually perform full out. I'm not asking them to mark through the dance, where a dancer kind of walks through it and does some of what they would normally do on stage. I'm asking them to move, and move in the same manner that the piece was choreographed. And that's what Thea is doing here. And again, the lighting here was so important. When she first did it, and we took a few shots, it became clear to me that something as simple as her foot disappeared in that black background, and that would have ruined this particular picture. So it was important to light it in such a way that the foot and the skirt were well lit, and that we had what I love in costume that is moving. We have the beautiful gradations of gray to deep gray to almost black, and that adds to the choreographic voice that Martha was stating here. Her voice is clear, and she wanted to show the joy, the pure joy, in this particular section of Frontier, and we were able to capture it. Again, Thea and I working together. Again, talking about warming up and capturing a moment that is truly, seconds before he were to come out of that. And Toby Towson is a dancer and a gymnast. Um, Most gymnasts need certain types of equipment to do what they do, but we were able to capture this particular moment in the studio. Again, with him talking me through it first. I'm amazed at how much talking we do in order for me to really capture the timing necessary to capture this moment. And again, we were able to collaborate together to talk through it and get here to this point.
Is this one of the photo sessions that where you used music?
I didn't say that again. I'm
Is
sorry.
this one of the photo sessions where you used music to help with warm-ups?
This one we did use music. We did have music for timing. Yes. Uh, and for some dancers, the music is almost necessary. It has to be there. Others don't want it. They see it as a distraction. But here we did have music.
Next slide.
And again, just reiterating what I just said, having music gets some dancers, into the moment that you're trying to capture. And the etude, again, helped Toby to get there. Uh, and it's really based on, I guess, the psychology of the dancer, whether the music works for them or doesn't. I've been in situations where we were trying to photograph something but didn't have music and had to actually stop and revisit that piece with music and actually bring in either live music or recorded music.
Next slide.
And this is one of those places where we actually did have, I believe we had recorded music for this particular piece. And when you look at her face, you look at the emotion that we were able to capture, that would not have been there without the music. The music helped to get her to that particular place. Uh, and the lighting on her face, her arm not being lost. Again, it, this is the embodiment of bringing together all of the different techniques to get here to this point where we're able to capture this particular moment.
Yes, the softness of her expression is extraordinary.
Yes.
Just the way that you've lit it so that
Yeah.
you can see the facial expression.
Yes. And the
Next
expression
slide.
here is extremely important. Yeah. Makeup. All performers need to have their makeup, but not as heavy as they would in an actual theater. In a theater, folks are using makeup to stand out so that folks in the back of the theater can actually see them, see their expression. But in the photographic studio, again, that's where there's a lot of collaboration with the dancer because you want the makeup, it's important, but it has to be for photography. Again, another area where things change in the photographic studio. And here you have a young man who's a Balinesian dancer. That's actually his father doing his makeup for him. He, I believe, at this time was about 12 years old, a true prodigy. And again, there was a bit of a language barrier here, but again, him seeing me at rehearsals and we would gesture to each other after seeing me at several rehearsals. When he would see me, he would smile and come over, shake my hand, and we would try to communicate without using words. Uh, that was our communication. And when he came into the studio, and he's a young man, so coming into a studio with a man who's going to have this critical camera photographing you, uh, you would expect him to be a little nervous, a little antsy. But when he came in, he saw me. Again, we don't speak. Uh, we can't. He couldn't speak English. I didn't speak his language, but we were now familiar and comfortable with each other. And again, that safe space that I talked about was present, so he could come in and perform wonderfully. Uh, he also understood that I would be stopping and tweaking the lights, and he understood that just based on having me around the studio. And here we have it. This was the final outcome of uh, me being present in the studio and him coming to the photographic studio and putting on full makeup, costume, and we moved through this particular piece of choreography uh, over and over again. But he got it, and he I think intuitively knew what I was looking for. I would try to create certain shapes with my body to tell him what I was looking for. And he would giggle, but he knew exactly what I was talking about. And he would get to that point. And again, it was a wonderful collaboration with someone who really didn't speak the language. I didn't speak his, but we were still able to communicate. And that level of communication is what's important when you're trying to create uh, a piece of art with another person. Next slide.
So tell us about the makeup challenges for this piece.
The makeup challenges here was to have her, one of her Zen masters, who is a painter, come in and paint on their nude bodies while they're moving in her space. This is a Zen temple. You can see the window in the background. That was important for me photographically because I wanted to show that this was in a different space, different than where I normally work. Again, super important for this particular piece was their knowledge of me and my knowledge of them, and their ability to feel comfortable with me. This particular piece is done with the dancers topless, so they are nude. And the painter, Bumju Lee, is actually painting on them. He is a calligrapher and a wonderful calligrapher. And as they're moving, he is actually painting their bodies. Bit of a challenge. Uh, Again, tweaking the lighting just right so that I was able to capture all of them and again create this shadow, because right now the calligrapher is the key person here, and I wanted to show him on the background in shadow also. So that was a bit of a challenge, but we were able to create that particular image and create that mood within her Zen temple. Next slide.
So perhaps you would tell us a little more about how music affected not just the movement, but even the comfort level.
This is the second take of this particular photo session. The first take, we didn't have any music, and when I looked at the contact sheets, I did not capture what I wanted. When I went and had a little conference with Kathy, she said, well, part of the reason why it probably didn't work was because the flute music wasn't there. I said, okay, well, let's do it again, but let's bring in a flautist and have them actually perform the music that we would have heard in the theater, and that's what we did. And you can see, I didn't have before and after pictures, but you can see what's going on here. She is totally engrossed in the music, and she's able to move through it flawlessly. And we spoke about the particular sections that I was looking for, and she was actually able to talk to the musician to get to that perfect place in the music that took her across the stage to this point. So yes, music is key for certain dancers, and she's one of them.
Next slide.
And here you see the same thing. Again, a particular section of the music enabled her to create this angelic looking photograph, again, using an incredible costume that moved with her body and with the air. Uh, Again, the lighting was such that I wanted to make certain that the costume was somewhat translucent and letting the lighting flow through while she's moving to this incredible music. It was transformative to have the music there. It made all the difference in her ability to get to this particular point. And with that, I would say, it takes a lot of work to get here. Not only does she have to know me, and I have to see this movement in the comfort of her studio where she's rehearsing and Eric is moving her through this movement and then taking it out of the rehearsal space, taking it out of the theater, bringing it into the photographic studio, lighting it, having the musician there to actually bring us to this point. It's a wonderful collaboration. This is the only way I know how to work with a dance artist.
Next slide.
Same holds true here for Laurie and her dances. This wasn't live music, it was recorded music, but the same concept. In order for them to get to this point, you know, it's through the music and through the beat of the music. The music takes them to this particular place. And again, we've tried to do things without music. It doesn't work as well. This is with music, and again, it's transformative, and it helps to create this type of photograph.
So we've also talked about, you and I, about how sometimes dancers together can help coach each other to get through the photographic moments and get the qualities you're looking at. And so maybe we will see a couple of examples of that too.
Yes.
Next slide.
Yes.
Next.
This is a great example of it. This is an unusual example of it also. Usually the coach is off and out of the picture, not in the picture. In this particular piece, Sunok Lee, Sunny as I like to call her, has choreographed this new piece, Lotus One, and Anju Wang. She is a new dancer. She's just learning this particular piece. Sunny, I don't know how she does it, but she can actually speak quite lowly. She doesn't have to look at the dancer. She's looking down because she's in her full performance mode, but she still knew what Anju was doing, and she was able to very quietly coach her through the movement because she hadn't had a chance to rehearse her the way that she wanted to. I had seen Sunny rehearse, so I knew what the movement was, but the other dancer did not. And she was able to coach her through the movement while being photographed. I was amazed at her ability to do that.
Next slide.
Here, there's a coach off stage, and the goal was to capture both of them, especially the position of their arms, to capture that at a particular moment. So you have two people doing slightly different things. The only way to get them there is through a coach that's got the beat going. So they're beating, and there's a timing there. And we both decided where that timing would be, that they would reach the apex of that. Again, what I talk about, the decisive moment. When you have two people, they both have to be in sync. So again, that person is behind me, keeping time and enabling them to move to that particular point. Without having that person present, would have been very difficult to get this particular photograph.
Next slide.
The joy here was to have the master himself, Eric Hawkins, behind me, giving direction as to what we wanted to photograph. Prior to the photograph, Eric, myself, that's Randy Howard and Kathy Ward. We were all sitting together talking about this particular moment. It's interesting talking about a moment and seeing a moment. And Eric has a way with words. He is one of the most articulate people, both choreographically and through his actual words, to bring someone to a particular point. Having him as a coach was just very special. It was a special moment. It was a moment that I will never forget. and he coached the dancers through many moments like this. He and I and the dance artist, we worked together for well over a decade, creating some just unbelievable images. And it would have been impossible to create them without having him there to act as a coach. So I'm indebted to him for the work that he did with me and with his dance artist.
Next slide.
And we bring it all together. Everything that I talked about, we just pull it all into the package. Again, this is another interesting moment in time. This was taken in 1974, 75, when Aiko and Koma first came to the United States. Their English wasn't great. My Japanese was non-existent, but I had seen them perform at the Japan Society and had been to many rehearsals with them, so I knew what I was looking for. The challenge here, again, was communication, letting them know what piece of the dance I wanted to photograph, which meant I had to do something that I don't often do, which is actually mark through what I was looking for. I am not a dancer. I don't pretend to be a dancer. I have two left feet. But I was able to show them what I was looking for, and they were able to understand what I was trying to capture, and they were able to get to that point in the dance where I was able to light it and photograph it. Just as an aside, uh, decades later, I'm in my office at SUNY Empire State College, and I hear someone speaking, and I said, "That voice sounds awfully familiar." I got up from my desk and went outside, and it was Aiko. Aiko was taking classes at Empire State College, and she had since graduated from there. So when we saw each other at this point, she speaks perfect English. I still speak no Japanese, but we were able to have a moment and talk about the past, and it was just a very, very important and meaningful moment to me. These are two incredible people. Their work and their work that they did with me over the decades was very special to me.
Next slide.
And Blues for the Jungle, Elio. You know, again, he is our choreographic father, and this was bringing it all together. The lighting, Elio himself, the knowledge of what he's doing and where this movement came from, the collaboration, the deep friendship. He felt so comfortable with me in the studio, and I felt so comfortable with him. It takes on a rather spiritual moment, and it just happens so naturally. Uh, it's just wonderful. We all miss him deeply. He left the earth way too soon. Next slide, please. Another magical moment. Lenny Williams performing Phoenix. Again, this is the whole package. This is the actual lighting, the movement, the knowledge. Lenny and I spent a lot of time together outside of the photographic studio talking about dance and talking about movement and talking about how he expresses himself. And that really enabled me to photographically do things with light and with just camera art, depth of field, sharpness or not, uh, stopping movement or not stopping it. Again, this came out of conversations with Lenny outside of the photographic studio. When we got into the studio, we both knew what we were looking for, and we were able to work seamlessly.
I think
These are,
this is also just a gorgeous example of what your principles of sculpting are. I
yeah,
mean, we can see the sinew, we can see the
yes,
costume, the suspension. We can feel that suspension and
yeah,
reaching from
yeah,
the way it's lit and his performance of that moment.
yes,
It reads so
yes,
clearly.
yeah. And it's the collaboration that I really value. Working together, operating together, creating together. This is magic. That's the only way I can describe it.
Next
Next
slide.
slide.
We're at the
I
point where we're going to start wrapping up our presentation today with a couple more pictures, but also some words from you about this whole process.
You know, it's hard to thank all of the people that got you to this point. Uh, photographically, people like Thomas Bouchard, Aiko Jose, definitely Robert Mapplethorpe, Barbara Morgan, who I still to this day study her work, Max Waldman, Zachary Friedman, George Platt Lynes, Irving Penn. Uh, I continue to study their work. I continue to study their lighting. These are all folks that understood the importance of lighting and understood the importance of the relationship between the photographer and the subject. I am deeply indebted to all of them. Without their work, I would not be able to do what I do. Just indebted to them. Next slide. This is the entire Pomare company. And, again, being indebted to a group of dancers, having them all on stage at the same time. Here, I said, I want to do a group shot, but I don't want to do a boring group shot. So I want you all moving. Movement is just so important to me. So they were able to create this wonderful piece where they are all connected. And it's that relationship, the connectedness, that's so important to me. And of course, the master is sitting at the edge where he usually sits. Even during performances, he's off stage, he's there, sometimes just there. His presence, his spirit is so meaningful to all of us, not just the dancers, but having him in the studio coaching people, not just coaching the dancers, sometimes coaching me. Again, that collaboration, that's just very, very special.
Next slide.
No words for Aiko and Koma. They are two Buto dancers who just bring out emotion and a sense of stillness in their work. These are not folks that move terribly fast. They take you to a still place where you begin to think and contemplate. And I think that's what's important about their work. Very introspective. You see inside yourself and inside them. Yes, very, very, two very, very important people. Next slide.
Next slide. Next.
There are too many people to acknowledge. My development started with Pat O'Brien at Photographics Unlimited. This was a lab and a studio where I was able to actually work for them as a black and white processor, film processor, and printer. And I send kudos to Pat O'Brien for even hiring this young man from the School of Visual Arts who told her, look, I got to pay my tuition. I need a job. And she was there and present and an important part of my development. And I send kudos to Pat. Thank you. Next slide. And again, still at School of Visual Arts, dance history was important. To do this work, you need to understand this work. You need to know its history. History is extremely important. And Dr. Sally Sumners was one of my favorite teachers who spent time with me because she also knew that I was a photographer and that I was photographing dance. And she and I worked together. We did work on a big project, a tap dance project. We worked on this together long after I graduated. We stayed in contact and still stay in contact. Again, kudos to you, Sally Summers. Next slide, please. And this is Sally with one of the world famous tap dancers, Honey Coles, and Dave Gilmore. We actually photographed Dave Gilmore in Central Park doing his particular routine. And at a festival sponsored by Pepsi on a stage, I believe, somewhere in New Jersey, we photographed Honey Coles and the Copacetics. That was really special to me because my parents were big jazz music, big band music, really, aficionados, and they were also very, very interested in tap dancers. So I was introduced to this long before I met Honey Cole. So when I met him, we had a great conversation about how my mom would take me to different events or show me different things on shows on TV with tap dance. And we had a great conversation. And again, this was backstage, so I was able to make him feel comfortable with having, this photographer in his dressing room along with Sally, and we were able to create some very memorable pictures. Next slide, please. Ray is why I'm here, and Ray is how you're getting my rather vast collection of photographs. Ray made it very clear to me that we don't live forever. And he brought us together, Libby and I, and thank God he did. Thank God he did. Ray and I speak every day. Kudos to you, Ray, and thank you for being who you are. And it's also important to note that Ray has saved the work of many an artist who has passed on. Ray has taken on huge collections of work and placed them in museums, college libraries, the Library of Congress, the New York Public Library Dance Division. He has saved many an artist and has created a footprint for artists that didn't have a footprint. Kudos to you, Ray. Kudos to you. Next slide, please. And that's Ray, myself, and I wanted Elio in the picture. Of course, this is after Elio has passed on. And that's the three of us together in my apartment. Kudos to you, Ray Steeler, for saving many an artist. Next slide. Libby, I wouldn't be here without you. I wouldn't be here without you. Thank you. Kudos to you. Next slide. So as I stated during my talk, all of my work is on film, and we are now in this wonderful digital realm. Mike Dugal, who heads up Dugal Visual Solutions, is helping me digitize thousands of negatives. This would be impossible without the generosity of Mike Dugal. Mike Dugal is my angel. Without him, you would not see these images. Mike, thank you, thank you, thank you. Kudos to you. Jim Justino is teaching me what it means to work with the digital medium. He is scanning, again, thousands of negatives and creating this vast archive for me. This is not easy because my negatives are large. They're not your standard 35 millimeter negatives. I photographed in the 2 1/4 format. So scanning is a task. And Jim Justino is a magician because he's really creating some things that I didn't think were possible. Jim, kudos to you. Thank you so very, very much. Next slide, please. Zulema. And that's why we call her Z. And that's why she calls herself Z. Z Morin is my contact at Dugal. Joe Smith is another contact at Dugal. These are the people that work behind the scenes with me to create these digital images. And again, you would not see these images if it were not for these people. Z is like a mother figure to me. She takes such very good care of me. Z, many, many, many thanks to you. Next slide. And finally, to the dance artist, I am indebted to all of you. I don't even have the words. Your friendship, your actual work, our relationships outside of the dance studio and outside of the rehearsal studio are extremely meaningful to me. And on the screen, you have a few names. You have Aiko Nkoma, Elio Pomare, Eric Hawkins, Laurie, Bella Love, Peggy Lyman, Ken Stephen Hilliard, Claire Iwatsu, Thea Narissa Barnes, George White. I just am indebted to all of you. And to those of you who have passed on, I know you're watching. I know you see this, and I know you hear me. And I thank you. I thank you. I can't thank you enough. Next slide. And that's me. That's me. Libby, thank you so very, very much. I really don't know how to thank you.
Dave,
this was wonderful.
You have thanked us, because this is truly a wonderful sharing of your career, of your stories about the artist and the artistry. I want to thank you for showing us how to make photographs dance. And I'm so glad that you have cared working with Lenny and all of the artists that you've befriended, Lori Bella Love, many of which I hold in such high esteem.
Yeah.
And also I am thankful that Ray Steeler brought us together so that we could, in fact, save your images for the nation and, present them in a secure way so that people can study them, appreciate them, understand the history. And with this presentation, they're also going to know some of the stories that made it happen. And that adds even more value to your photographs. I hope all of you who have been able to join us and watch that you will be thinking about perhaps coming to the Library of Congress and seeing more. As he said, it's a vast collection. There are more artists and more dances to be discovered. And I hope also, if you've enjoyed it, that you will let others know, perhaps some budding photography students or other artists, perhaps your children. I find the images of photography of dance communicates so beautifully to youngsters. They can see it and read it with so instinctively. They can find that emotion, and it's wonderful that they'll be able to do that, because many of these digital photographs, Dave has very generously said that we could put these online so that many of you who can't come through our doors will get to see these again.